The coffee cup hadn't been there during my 1 a.m. round. I was certain of it. Steam still curled from the black liquid inside the white ceramic mug, sitting perfectly centered on the empty desk in Suite 1502. My flashlight beam caught the rising vapor, making it dance like fingers beckoning me closer. I clicked my radio. "Base, this is Chen. Anyone else in the building tonight?" Static answered. I'd been working at Morrison Tower for exactly 6 nights, but I knew the procedures cold. 20 floors, hourly rounds, monitor the feeds. Simple, boring, safe. Everything my last security job hadn't been. The cup bothered me. Clean desks were policy for the tech firm that had occupied 1502 until last week's mass exodus. I'd watched their employees pack up, making sure they didn't take anything they shouldn't. No one had left this cup. My radio crackled to life with more static, then died completely. Back at the security desk, I pulled up the camera feeds. Nothing showed anyone entering 1502. The timestamp ticked forward, 2:15 a.m., just me in the empty building. The phone rang. My hand froze over the receiver. The caller ID displayed, Floor 13, Suite 1313. The 13th floor had been empty since before I started. Some startup's failed venture from what I'd heard. I answered. Static flooded the line, but beneath it, the unmistakable sound of fingers on keyboards, mouse clicks, office chairs squeaking. Normal office sounds from an empty floor. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin in the vast lobby. The typing stopped. Something that might have been breathing replaced it. I hung up. The elevator dinged. My heart lurched as the display showed it ascending, stopping at 13. No one had called it. I checked the electronic key logs. No card swipes recorded for that floor in weeks. The cameras showed nothing but dark hallways, until one by one they began to glitch. Static, snow, then black. My tablet pinged. System malfunction. I had to check it out. That's what they paid me for. What I'd failed to do at my last job when... No, don't think about that. The elevator felt colder than usual. When the doors opened on 13, the emergency lights cast everything in a sickly green glow. Papers scattered the floor, old incident reports. I knelt to examine one, then felt my blood freeze. It was from Maxwell Security, my old company. The report detailed the accident, my accident, the one where I hadn't checked the maintenance area, where that worker had... The lights flickered. Footsteps echoed from above, clear, purposeful steps. My phone was dead. Every office monitor on the floor suddenly blazed to life, displaying security footage. My old workplace. The hallway where it happened. I ran for the security desk. The monitors there showed the same footage, my last day at Maxwell, right before everything went wrong. Something small caught my eye under the desk. A USB drive taped beneath. The files told a story. Morrison Tower, Maxwell Security, same parent company. Pattern of accidents, cover-ups, settlements. My hands shook as I scrolled through document after document. The power returned with a hum. An email notification popped up. Video attachment. My heart pounded as I watched. Me, doing rounds for the past week. Every move recorded. Someone studying my routine. The ground floor security door beeped, opened. Footsteps approached. Heavy, multiple sets. A figure appeared in the lobby. Corporate jacket, Maxwell Security logo. 2 more behind him. "Mr. Chen," the man set a briefcase on the desk. "We needed to be certain about you. About your reliability. Your discretion. The cup, the phone calls, you orchestrated all of it?" He nodded, sliding papers across the desk. "We have a position that requires someone who understands the importance of following procedures. Someone who's learned from their mistakes." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your test results were interesting." I signed where he pointed, hands steadier than they'd been all night. As they left, I pulled up the security footage from my shift. Everything was there. The men setting up their elaborate test, the phone calls, the monitors, almost everything. The coffee cup appeared on the desk at 1:47 a.m., but the cameras showed no one entering Suite 1502. And on floor 13, in the far corner of the frame, something moved in the darkness. Something that wasn't part of any test. I still work at Morrison Tower. I'm still not sure what happened that night, but sometimes during my rounds, I smell fresh coffee brewing on empty floors, and I don't stop to investigate anymore. Some questions are better left unanswered. The numbers wouldn't balance. I'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for hours, watching that $2.7 million discrepancy mock me from my monitor. My fourth cup of coffee had gone cold, and the fluorescent light above my desk had started that maddening flicker that seemed to pulse in sync with my growing headache. I glanced at my phone, 9:47 p.m. The 38th floor of Morton & Shaw Financial was a tomb of empty cubicles and humming computers. Everyone else had escaped hours ago, leaving me alone with the year-end books and my crushing anxiety about student loan payments. My inbox pinged. The CFO's name made my stomach clench. Final reports needed by morning. Critical for board meeting. No exceptions. S. I rubbed my temples. The light above me stuttered, then went dark for 3 seconds before blazing back to life with an angry buzz. That's when I heard it. The soft, rhythmic clicking of keys from somewhere in the cubicle maze. Hello? My voice sounded small in the vast open space. The typing continued. Click, 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 click. Mechanical. Perfect tempo. I stood, my chair squeaking in protest. Security, is that you? Following the sound, I wandered through the maze until I found Ted from Accounts Payable, hunched over his keyboard. His fingers moved with inhuman precision. I touched his shoulder. Ted, I thought everyone was gone. His head turned, just his head, body remaining perfectly still. His eyes were glassy, reflected screen light showing cascading numbers. Deadlines must be met. His voice had a metallic echo. Productivity must be maintained. Ted, you're freaking me out. I stepped back. His fingers had melded into the keyboard, becoming one with the plastic. Dark veins pulsed beneath his translucent skin, carrying something that looked less like blood and more like printer toner. I ran to the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly. Nothing. My inbox pinged again. The sender's name made me freeze. CEO Marcus Shaw. He'd never emailed anyone below VP level. Critical. Stay until completion. Resistance impacts quarterly metrics. The overhead lights dimmed, emergency strips casting sickly green shadows. Security cameras swiveled toward me with soft whirs. I watched in horror as more figures appeared at their desks. Johnson from tax, Maria from compliance, dozens of others. They hadn't walked in. They simply materialized, all typing in perfect synchronization. Their monitors displayed binary code instead of spreadsheets. The coffee mugs on their desks held something black and viscous that pulsed like a heart. I rushed back to my desk, hands shaking as I pulled up the financial data. The numbers started shifting, rearranging. They weren't accounting figures at all. They were feeding schedules, harvesting quotas. Each overtime hour, each missed family dinner, each canceled vacation had been carefully calculated and consumed. I pulled up our department's quarterly performance dashboards, searching for anything that might explain the discrepancy. But the historical data charts weren't showing productivity metrics anymore. They displayed transformation rates, absorption quotas, digital conversion tallies. Years of carefully documented metamorphosis, each employee's humanity broken down into quantifiable assets, hidden in plain sight, in the endless Excel sheets and PowerPoint decks we'd all seen 1,000 times before. The building itself was a circuit board, and we were its components. The walls began to ripple. Carpet tiles peeled back, revealing pulsing circuitry. Ted and the others turned toward me in unison, their faces now screens displaying error messages. In desperation, I grabbed my student loan statements, hands trembling as I held them up like a cross before a vampire. I'm $157,000 in debt. My productivity is compromised. I'm damaged assets. The screens flickered. Binary code scrolled across Ted's face. Error. Asset compromised. Reject. I ran for the stairs as the office transformed around me. Cubicle walls melted into motherboards. The floor became a sea of writhing cables. 38 flights down, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. I burst out of the building into gray dawn, watching early shift workers trudging toward the entrance, their eyes already glazing over. My resignation letter was in my bag, my escape plan, but when I pulled it out, the words were changing. black ink flowing and reforming. Request for internal transfer, night shift, permanent assignment. I watched the morning crowd shuffle past me into the building, their shadows stretching behind them like cables about to plug in. I still had numbers to balance. The spreadsheet was waiting, and somewhere on the 38th floor, an empty cubicle was calling my name. My phone pinged. New email. Welcome to the night shift. Productivity will be maintained. I looked up at the tower of glass and steel, its windows reflecting the rising sun like 1,000 blank computer screens. Somewhere up there, the entity that wore Morton and Shaw like a suit was waiting, hungry for another quarter of record growth, and my student loans weren't going to pay themselves. I dug through my bag for my antidepressants, fingers trembling as they closed around the familiar orange bottle. For 2 years, these pills had been my anchor, my daily ritual of survival in the corporate maze. One small act of self-preservation in a world designed to grind me down. The bottle felt wrong, heavier, colder. When I pulled it out, the label was corrupted, the text crawling across the surface like dying insects. My doctor's name had become an error message. The chemical compound had transformed into lines of binary. I opened the cap. The pills were gone. In their place writhed something black and viscous, the same substance that had filled my co-workers' coffee mugs. It pulsed with awful life, recognizing my presence. As I stared, it began to rise, reaching for me with tendrils that looked like cables, like ink, like liquefied despair. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the bottle. The darkness inside responded to my tremors, rippling with almost eager anticipation. This thing that had replaced my medication knew me, knew my dependencies, knew exactly how many times I'd relied on chemical help to make it through another soul-crushing day at the office. It oozed between my fingers, burning like ice, like frozen static. Where it touched my skin, I could feel my synapses rewiring, my neurons firing in terrifying new patterns. Even this, my last defense against corporate conformity, my daily chemical rebellion, had been assimilated, optimized, improved for workplace performance. The label gave one final glitch before settling into its new text. Morton and Shaw Productivity Enhancement Compound. Take as needed for maximum efficiency. Side effects may include integration, digital absorption, and loss of obsolete human characteristics. Refills, infinite. My phone hadn't stopped pinging. Dozens of emails now, each from a higher level of management that shouldn't exist. Executive Vice President of Night Operations, Chief Director of Human Capital Conversion, Senior Manager of Productivity Enhancement. A security guard approached, his movements too smooth, too precise. Your workstation has been upgraded for optimal performance. His badge flickered like a corrupted video file, his name changing with each step. The corporation values your dedication. I backed away, clutching my corrupted resignation letter. The morning sun cast my shadow against the building's gleaming surface. It wasn't my shape anymore, but a twisted framework of cables and ports. A familiar face emerged from the revolving door. Sarah Chen from Internal Audit, her eyes now LED displays scrolling with code. Join us for the morning integration meeting? Her smile was a loading bar at 99%. Others were emerging now, their bodies glitching between human and hardware. Each wore a name tag displaying their efficiency ratings and quarterly productivity metrics. They moved in perfect synchronization, a choreographed dance of corporate automation. My phone screamed with a final email. Notice of mandatory overtime, infinite term contract activated. The tower's shadow stretched across the street like a liquid circuit board, swallowing the morning light. I could feel the pull of my desk upstairs, the siren song of deadlines and deliverables. My fingers twitched, aching for keyboard contact. I thought of my father's words when I took this job. The corporate world will eat you alive. He had no idea how literal that warning was. The revolving door spun, beckoning. 38 floors above, my monitor glowed like a beacon. The year-end books were still unbalanced. The entity needed its feed. And somewhere in the digital labyrinth of Morton and Shaw Financial, Ted and the others typed eternal columns of ones and zeros, their humanity compiled into corporate assets. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching my shadow's circuits pulse in sync with the building's heartbeat. Each ping of my phone sent electricity through my veins, every notification a hook dragging me closer to those revolving doors. I thought about running. I could max out my credit cards, flee to some remote town where corporations hadn't yet sunk their digital tendrils. But my student loan app chose that moment to send its weekly update. $157,432, 18 cents remaining, interest accumulating by the second. The numbers burned in my vision like lines of code. A UI surfaced. My mother's face when I told her I'd landed this job. "Morton and Shaw, you'll be set for life, honey." She wasn't wrong, just not in the way she meant. Sarah Chen's LED eyes flickered expectantly. The security guard's pixels rearranged into another warm, inhuman smile. Behind them, the revolving door spun with mechanical patience. Each rotation a hypnotic invitation. Submit, conform, integrate. My fingers twitched, already aching for keyboard contact. I could feel my desk upstairs calling to me, its monitor glow a beacon of terrible purpose. The unbalanced books waited, the entity hungered. And really, wasn't this always how it was going to end? Hadn't every all-nighter, every skipped vacation, every missed family dinner been preparing me for this moment? I took one step forward. My reflection in the building's glass surface showed the truth. I was already changing, my business casual attire morphing into circuitry, my tie a USB cable seeking connection. The choice had been made long ago, one overtime shift at a time. After all, what's the alternative in this economy? A job is a job, even if it costs your soul. My phone pulsed with one final message, its screen bleeding that familiar black ichor. "Welcome to the team. You'll never want to leave." The worst part? As I pushed through the revolving door, feeling my humanity begin to compile into corporate assets, I knew they were right. I'd found my place in the organizational chart of this digital hell. And somewhere on the 38th floor, an empty workstation waited to complete my integration. Time to clock in.
The first time room 309 whispered my name, I was checking Mrs. Henderson's IV in room 308. The sound slithered through the wall like smoke, barely there, yet unmistakable. "Sarah," I dropped my pen. 3 years on night shift, and I'd learned every creak and groan of St. Mary's Community Hospital. This was different. The next morning, I checked Mrs. Henderson's chart at the nurses' station. Room 308 had been empty all week, according to the logs. When I asked about her transfer, the day shift nurse just stared at me blankly. Who? That's when the doubts started creeping in. I pulled charts for my other patients, Mr. Lewis with the chronic cough, the Garcia twins recovering from tonsillectomies, old Miss Long with her crossword puzzles. The details in my notes didn't match the official records. Medications I swore I'd administered weren't listed. Vital signs I'd recorded didn't exist. Some of my patients' names weren't in the system at all. 3 years of night shift memories began to blur at the edges, like old photographs left in the sun. Had I imagined them all? Or had room 309 been slowly consuming more than just nurses, erasing patients room by room, night by night, leaving only me to remember? The hallway stretched before me in twilight dimness, emergency lights casting pools of sickly yellow every 20 feet. Budget cuts meant minimal staffing, just me, Ancient Earl the janitor, and a sleeping security guard in the lobby. The ER was empty, unusual for a Friday, but I wasn't complaining, until I heard it again. My footsteps echoed as I approached room 309. The monitor inside beeped steadily, but that was impossible. The room wasn't assigned to anyone, shouldn't even be powered. Faded yellow tape crossed the door in an X. Do not enter. The edges were curled and gray with age, yet the adhesive held firm. I pulled out my tablet, checking patient assignments. Room 309 didn't exist in the system. The floor plan jumped from 308 to 310. I pressed my hand against the door. Cold radiated through the wood, the kind of deep chill that seeps into bones. You shouldn't be here, Miss Sarah. Earl's mop sloshed against the linoleum behind me. His weathered face was drawn tight, eyes fixed on the door. I pulled back. Why is this room sealed? Earl's gnarled hands wrung his mop handle. Some things better left alone, especially at night. He shuffled away, leaving wet streaks on the floor. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, the whispers grew bolder, the beeping more insistent. I searched hospital records in the basement archive, fingers ghosting over dusty files. At first, I thought I'd found a pattern. 6 night nurses vanishing over 30 years, roughly 5 years apart. But the deeper I dug, the more the pattern unraveled. 2 disappeared within 6 months of each other in 1992. Then nothing for almost 15 years before 3 more vanished in a single week. The most recent was just last year, Angela Long, fresh out of nursing school. But I found older records too, crumbling papers from the 1960s describing a ward closure incident. 4 missing in one night. Some files were stranger still. A night nurse from 1973 who, according to her final chart note, treated a patient in 309 who'd been admitted in 2025. Another whose badge photo showed a different face in every weekly security scan, though her name stayed the same. Their files ended abruptly. No resignations, no transfers. Just empty spaces where explanations should be. The more I searched, the less sense it made. The patterns I desperately wanted to find dissolved into chaos. Only one thing stayed consistent. Room 309 appeared in every report, though the room numbers on that floor had supposedly been reorganized 3 times since the hospital's opening. Tonight, the monitor in 309 screamed. Code blue flashed on the overhead screens. My heart slammed against my ribs as I ran for the crash cart. The call should have brought others running, but the halls remained empty, my footsteps the only sound beneath the shrieking alarm. Security, respond! My radio crackled static. Anyone, please respond! The door handle to 309 turned slowly, metal grinding against metal. I should have run, should have left the building, quit my job, moved to another state. Instead, I stepped forward as the door swung open. The room was standard issue: bed, monitors, chair, window. But wrong, somehow. The sheets bore fresh wrinkles, as if someone had just stood up. Equipment blinked and beeped, though no cords connected them to outlets. No patient, no chart. Wait. There. A clipboard hung at the foot of the bed. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. The admission date was today's date. The time? Right now. The patient name was mine. Under cause of death, neat handwriting read, Curiosity. The room grew darker, colder. The walls seemed to pulse, to breathe. The window showed not parking lot lights, but infinite darkness. I ran. The air thickened around me like cold honey, each step a battle against invisible currents. The hallway twisted impossibly, stretching and contracting like a living thing. Room numbers blurred past, 312, 309, 347, 309 again. The walls rippled, geometric patterns writhing beneath the paint like restless snakes. My lungs burned. Each breath tasted of copper and frost. The darkness ahead seemed to watch, to wait, populated by shapes that vanished when looked at directly. Behind me, the steady beep 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 of monitors grew closer, no matter how fast I ran. Every turn brought me back to 309's gaping doorway. Inside, shadows danced on the ceiling, casting figures that walked upside down. The monitors screamed in harmony now, their digital readouts showing impossible symbols. My radio spat voices speaking backwards, the words just familiar enough to make my skin crawl. The ceiling lights died one by one, darkness flooding in like rising water. In the last flickers of emergency lighting, I saw handprints appearing on the walls, dozens, then hundreds, pressed outward as if trying to escape. The floor tilted beneath my feet. Gravity shifted, pulling me toward 309 like a hungry mouth. I clawed at the walls, my fingers leaving fresh prints among the others. The cold grew teeth, biting deep. I found the stairwell by touch alone and huddled there until dawn painted the windows gold. Ma'am? A security guard, young, concerned, touched my shoulder. You okay? The morning shift arrived in a wave of cheerful chatter. I followed them to the 3rd floor. Between rooms 308 and 310 stood a solid wall. No door, no tape. My phone showed photos of the same unbroken wall, dated weeks back. My badge felt heavy. I looked down, reading the department designation I knew by heart. Where night shift had been engraved for 3 years, the plastic now read float pool. I still work at St. Mary's. I had to know, you see. Had to understand. Now I sit in the darkness, watching new night nurses pass by. Sometimes they hear whispers. Sometimes they stop outside a blank wall, puzzled. Sometimes they check their badges, frowning at designations they swear used to read something else. I should warn them. But curiosity is a terminal condition, and misery loves company. Listen, do you hear that beeping? You hear that? I ran down the main aisle, counting numbers under my breath while fluorescent lights flickered overhead. 10, 11, 12, 14. My heart slammed against my ribs. I whirled around, sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. 12, 11, 10. No. It was happening again. The store stretched endlessly before me, aisles becoming darker corridors that seemed to breathe. My reflection fragmented in the frozen food doors. Pale face, dark circles under wild eyes, blue vest hanging crooked. The night shift had changed me. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. A shopping cart creaked somewhere in the darkness. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere. Metal wheels screaming against linoleum. The security cameras tracked my movement, their red lights pulsing in unison like dying stars. Mr. Gray's voice echoed through the empty store. Aisle 13 needs restocking. I pressed my back against the dairy case, trying to become invisible among the gallon jugs of milk. Their expiration dates blurred before my eyes, numbers shifting into impossible configurations. It started 3 weeks ago. I needed money for next semester after dropping out of college. Just a temporary thing, I told myself. The overnight stocking position seemed perfect. Easy work, decent pay, no customers to deal with. Just me, the shelves, and silence. My first night, Manager Dan pulled me aside. His face looked gray, almost corpse-like under the fluorescent lights. We're transferring you to nights. We need reliable people. He handed me a new name tag, his fingers ice cold against my palm. Mr. Gray will show you the ropes. The night manager appeared as if summoned, tall and thin with a smile that never reached his eyes. Welcome to the team. His clipboard tapped against his thigh in an arrhythmic pattern. You'll be handling aisle 13 tonight. There is no... I stopped, because his smile had too many teeth. Just keep stocking. That's all you need to worry about. He glided away, his footsteps making no sound on the linoleum. Strange things started happening after that, though at first I convinced myself it was just sleep deprivation playing tricks on my mind. The security cameras would swivel to track me, even the broken ones. I blamed it on drafts from the ventilation system, on squeaky joints and old mounting brackets. When they pointed at angles that shouldn't exist, focused on corners that weren't there the night before, I started taking photos with my phone to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. The pictures always came out blurry. The automatic doors would whoosh open to an empty parking lot, letting in gusts of cold air that smelled like wet cement and old meat. I spent a week testing the motion sensors. Sure, there had to be a malfunction. I called maintenance twice. They said they'd look into it, but no one ever came. Products moved between shifts. I'd spend hours organizing the cereal aisle, only to return and find everything rearranged, boxes facing backward, some brands I'd never heard of mixed in between the Cheerios and Cap'n Crunch. The first time, I reported it to day shift, certain some kids had broken in overnight. The second time, I started keeping detailed notes of product placement. The third time, I found my notebook filled with inventory numbers and handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. I Googled night shift hallucinations on my breaks, sleep paralysis, circadian rhythm disorders. There had to be a rational explanation. I started bringing energy drinks, then switched to coffee, then stopped sleeping altogether. Anything to stay alert, to prove to myself that what I was seeing wasn't real. But the cameras kept watching. The doors kept opening to nothing. And sometimes, in the moments between stocking shelves and checking inventory, I'd catch glimpses of something moving in the corners of my vision, something that disappeared when I turned to look, leaving behind only the faint echo of squeaking wheels, and the sensation of being watched. Other employees noticed too. Justin, who'd worked here 5 years, started taking his breaks with me in the cramped back room. He'd been different from the start, the only one who met my eyes, who seemed to breathe like a real person. His hands shook when he lit his cigarettes, but his voice stayed steady as he told me about the shadows that moved behind the shelves. "Something's wrong with this place," he whispered during our 3 a.m. break, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. His wedding ring clinked against his coffee mug, a ritual I'd grown used to. "The numbers don't add up. The aisles, they're changing. My wife thinks I'm going crazy, but..." He leaned closer, coffee forgotten. "Yesterday I counted 14 aisles going east to west, but 16 going west to east. How is that possible?" I wanted to tell him about the security cameras, about the way they watched us even when powered down. Instead, I just nodded, grateful not to be alone in my growing paranoia. "Listen," he said, checking his watch. "After shift, we should..." Mr. Gray's voice crackled over the intercom, making us both jump. "Justin to dairy for restocking." Justin's face went slack, his coffee mug slipping from his fingers. It shattered on the floor, but he was already moving, pulled by invisible strings. "I have to... The dairy case needs..." His voice sounded distant, mechanical. "Justin, wait." But he was gone. The next night, I found his cart abandoned by the dairy case, still full of yogurt that had started to curdle before my eyes. The security footage showed him walking into aisle 8, but never coming out. When I checked, aisle 8 was the pet food section, exactly where it had always been. His coffee mug still sat in the break room, the handle chipped. "World's okayest dad," barely legible. I asked about him the next day. Mr. Gray's smile never wavered. Justin found other opportunities. His clipboard showed employee names, crossed out one by one. Under Justin's name, I could just make out a date, next week's schedule, showing him working aisle 13. I told myself I'd quit. Every morning, I walked to my car promising it would be my last shift. But somehow, I kept finding myself back at work, vest on, name tag pinned crooked. I couldn't explain why. It was like the store had its hooks in me, pulling me back night after night, until the line between reality and whatever was happening in those aisles began to blur. Then I started seeing it. Aisle 13. Just glimpses at first, like a shadow in my peripheral vision. Then one night, it was there. A narrow corridor stretching between aisles 12 and 14, the ceiling so high it vanished into darkness. The shelves seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light, like bruised skin under fluorescent bulbs. The air felt wrong here, thick and greasy against my skin, carrying a smell that made my teeth ache. Not quite rotting, but the moment just before decay begins. Static electricity crackled along the metal shelving, making my arm hair stand on end. Each breath tasted like copper pennies and burnt sugar. Mr. Gray materialized beside me. "Remember, stay on task." He pressed a box cutter into my palm, his fingers ice cold and slightly tacky, like raw chicken left too long on the counter. "Some things need to be restocked." The fluorescent lights above the aisle flickered in sequence, leading into the darkness like runway lights into hell. Each flicker lasted a fraction too long, the darkness between pulses stretching just past what felt natural. Shopping baskets lay abandoned on the floor, their metal frames twisted into impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The price tags on the shelves displayed numbers that writhed and shifted, sometimes counting backward, sometimes in dimensions that shouldn't exist. I knew I should run. Instead, I stepped forward. The linoleum beneath my feet had a subtle give to it, like walking on old meat. Each footstep echoed too many times, as if the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't there. The aisle stretched endlessly, the floor tilting subtly downward. The shelves loomed closer on either side, their edges softening and hardening in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Products on the shelves weren't quite right. Boxes of cereal where the mascot's eyes followed my movement. Cans of soup that felt warm and pulsed when touched. Bottles of cleaning products that whispered brand names in voices just below hearing. Shadows moved between the shelves, dozens of them, all pushing carts, all wearing blue vests. The wheels squealed against the floor in a chorus that sounded almost like singing. The air grew thicker with each step, tasting of ozone and old pennies, until breathing felt like swallowing syrup. Something moved ahead, a figure pushing a cart. The wheels made wet sounds against the floor, leaving trails that glistened under the flickering lights. My cart. They turned, and I saw myself. But wrong. The skin was gray and slick like wet paper, the eyes sunken and glassy like marbles pushed into dough. The mouth opened in a silent scream, too wide, joints cracking like brittle plastic as it reached for products that vanished the moment they touched the shelves. Behind it, I saw more versions of myself, stretching into infinity, each more decayed than the last. Some were missing parts. Others had too many. "Help!" it whispered in my voice, but distorted, like a recording played underwater. I've been here so long. So many shifts. They never end. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. The thing that wore my face lurched forward, its movements jerky like a damaged VHS tape. "Stay," it rasped. "We need reliable people. Always need reliable people." Others emerged from between the shelves, all wearing my face, all reaching with gray fingers. Their name tags displayed dates, years, decades into the future. I ran. The aisle stretched behind me, growing longer with each step. The lights flickered, and in the darkness between pulses, I felt cold hands brushing my neck. The air turned thick as syrup, each step requiring more effort than the last. The exit appeared suddenly, a rectangle of normal fluorescent light. I dove through, crashing into a display of canned soup. When I looked back, aisle 13 was gone. I tried to quit the next day. Really, I did. But somehow I kept finding myself back at work, vest on, name tag pinned crooked. The store had its hooks in me. Every shift now, aisle 13 appears somewhere new. Behind the break room door, through the loading dock, in the bathroom mirror. The other employees don't notice anything wrong. Their eyes are glassy, movements mechanical. Sometimes I catch glimpses of their true faces and reflections, all wearing Mr. Gray's too wide smile. Tonight, I'm running again, counting aisles backward and forward, looking for a way out. Mr. Gray stands at the end of every aisle, smiling that too wide smile. "Stay on task," they say in unison. "We need reliable people." I catch my reflection in a freezer door and pause. My skin looks gray, my movements slightly wrong, like a video playing at the wrong speed. I press my hand against the glass, watching as it passes through the surface like smoke. I think I've been here longer than I remember. The name tag on my vest shows a date, but I can't quite read it. Would you like help finding anything? We're always looking for reliable people. Aisle 13 has some wonderful specials tonight.
The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., its shrill tones slicing through my caffeine-induced haze. 3 consecutive night shifts at the Windward Hotel had taught me to hate that sound. Nobody calls the front desk at this hour with good news. I glanced at Marco's empty chair beside the desk, remembering his last night shift 2 weeks ago. He'd been different that night, jittery, his usual easy smile replaced by something tight and wooden. He'd been up on the 4th floor again, his boots leaving wet prints on the lobby's marble floor. "You hear it yet?" he'd asked, dropping his toolbox with a clang that echoed through the empty lobby. "The rhythm in the pipes?" I'd nodded, trying to match his usual joke-trading mood. "Like a bad drum solo?" "No." He'd grabbed my arm, fingers leaving damp marks on my sleeve. "Like breathing, like something keeping time." His eyes had darted to the service elevator. 3 weeks I've been tracking the pattern. Always builds up to the 3rd night. Always starts in room 417. He'd pulled out his tablet, hands trembling as he'd pulled up the maintenance logs. "Look at the pressure readings. They don't make sense. Water flowing uphill, pipes that should be empty running full, and the inspection videos." He'd swiped through image after image of dark water and darker shapes. "Marco, maybe you should take a break. Get some sleep." "Can't sleep. Not with what's down there. Not with what I found behind the old well walls." He'd leaned close, whispering now. "They built this place wrong. Built it deep. The blueprints are all lies. There's a whole other level below the utility basement. I found the original drawings hidden in the city archives. This wasn't supposed to be a hotel. It was supposed to be The elevator had dinged then, making us both jump. Marco had grabbed his toolbox, backing away. Just watch the patterns, in the water, in the reflections. They're trying to show us something, trying to warn us. He'd pressed a key ring into my hand. If I don't come back, check the maintenance room. I've left everything there, but whatever you do, don't. The elevator had dinged again. Marco had cursed, hurrying toward the stairwell. Third night, he'd called back. Always the third night. I'd found his toolbox the next morning, abandoned by the fourth-floor maintenance room. The tools inside were rust-free and dry, but somehow they left red stains on my hands. The massive chandelier cast fractured reflections across the lobby's marble floor, creating patterns that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. The ancient building had its own pulse after midnight, singing with the rhythm of groaning pipes and humming vending machines. The call display blinked. Room 417. My hand froze over the receiver. Marco's warning echoed in my head. Always starts in room 417. The entire fourth floor had been sealed for renovations. The floor that didn't quite align with the others, offset because of what the blueprints called original well integration. The windward was built over some underground spring that used to supply half the city. These days, those ancient pipes sang their own tunes. I picked up. Static crackled through the line, and beneath it, the unmistakable sound of running water. Not the gentle splash of a shower or sink, but the heavy rush of a flood. The kind of sound you hear standing next to a broken dam. The same sound I'd been picking up on my phone recordings of the pipe noise. My free hand moved to the maintenance log where I'd been charting the patterns. The timeline was perfect. 3 weeks of pressure anomalies, just like Marco had tracked before he vanished. I'd mapped them against the building plans, trying to trace the water's path. Something about the flow was wrong. It moved against gravity, following a pattern that looked almost deliberate. The lobby lights flickered, and the decrepit ice machine down the hall groaned to life unprompted. Third time tonight. I'd been timing these incidents too, each one exactly 17 minutes apart, just like the timing Marco had noted before he disappeared, just like the pattern I'd found in reports of those missing guests 3 years ago. My finger hovered over the disconnect button when a whisper cut through the static, a voice made of water and white noise. Found something in the pipes, lower than the blueprints show. You need to see this. Marco's voice. But Marco had been gone for 2 weeks, his toolbox still sitting in the maintenance room where I'd found it, his final log entry ending in a violent ink streak. I'd been analyzing that last entry under every light source in the building, trying to make out what was written beneath the stain. I should have hung up, should have called the police, finally reported everything I'd discovered. But I'd spent 2 weeks piecing together this puzzle. The missing persons reports, the construction records, the strange offset in the fourth floor's dimensions. I was close to something, close to what Marco had found. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the desk, swinging from its cord. The voice continued to whisper from the dangling receiver, too faint to make out words, but too distinct to be random noise. I pulled out my own phone, started recording. The whispers formed a pattern, the same rhythm I'd documented in the pipes. The security monitors cast a sickly blue glow across the front desk. I'd arranged them specifically to watch the fourth floor, tracking the shadows that moved when they thought no one was looking. My eyes swept across empty corridors and silent stairwells until they reached those feeds. Usually static, now they showed darkness with a purpose. As I leaned closer, something moved in that blackness. A shadow passing through shadow, a darker shape in the dark. I clicked through the camera feeds, following the shadow's movement. It was heading toward the service elevator, the one that went deeper than the others, down to the original utility rooms, the one Marco had been obsessed with. I'd tried accessing those lower levels myself, but the elevator required a maintenance key after hours, the same key Marco had given me 2 weeks ago. I watched the ancient dial turn, the needle rising from the sub-basement with mechanical precision. According to my research, that level shouldn't even exist. The original blueprints only showed a water collection chamber, but I'd found discrepancies in the construction permits, gaps in the inspection records. Whatever was down there, the hotel had gone to great lengths to hide it. The maintenance log lay open before me, its pages warped and stiff with old water damage. I'd been comparing Marco's entries to historical incidents, building a timeline of disappearances. His neat handwriting deteriorated over 3 months of fourth-floor problems. Tonight, the words seemed to writhe on the page. Water leak reported room 417. Investigated. No source found. Pressure dropping in north wing. Pipes sound wrong, like breathing. Found old inspection photos. Something in the water tank, shaped like... The rest was smeared, the ink bleeding into a dark stain that spread across the paper like spilled wine. My hands trembled as I traced the words. I'd been trying to reconstruct that last entry for days, photographing it under different lights, trying to enhance the image. The paper felt wrong. Too cold, too wet. Water beaded on my fingertips, though the log had been sitting untouched for days. Just like the impossible dampness that had marked Marco's sleeve when he grabbed me that night. The computer chimed. My hands trembled as I traced the words in the log. The paper felt wrong. Too cold, too wet. Water beaded on my fingertips, though the log had been sitting untouched for days. Just like the impossible dampness that had marked Marco's sleeve when he grabbed me that night. The computer flickered, screen dimming before brightening again. A reservation appeared. Text rendering in chunks like it was fighting through interference. Room 417. The timestamp caught my eye. The middle of the night, this very hour. Guest name? Marco Rodriguez. More reservations began appearing, bleeding onto the screen. Room 415. Sandra Adams, vanished during a business trip in '87. Room 416. William Douglas, last seen at the front desk in '62. The dates blurred together, but the rooms were always the same cluster on the 4th floor, the check-ins always in these darkest hours before dawn. The printer juddered to life with a wet, gurgling sound. Cards emerged one by one, each moving slower than the last, as if being pushed through deep water. They were soaked through, ink bleeding across the pages, but the signatures remained crisp and clear, written in hands that hadn't held a pen in decades. Chime, room 418. Chime, room 419, chime, chime, chime. The printer stuttered to life, its mechanical whine taking on a wet, gurgling quality. The first registration card emerged, sliding out with an oily slowness. I could have sworn I saw it pulse. The card was heavy in my hands, paper saturated beyond what should have been possible. Water ran down my wrists, not dripping but flowing, as if the card were being continuously fed from some endless source. The ink bled and swirled, but Marco's name remained stark and clear, written in the same trembling hand I'd watched fill out maintenance logs. Another card dragged itself free of the printer. Sandra Adams's signature crawled across the bottom, M in real time, the pen strokes appearing one by one in precise, deliberate movements. The paper felt cold, colder than water should be, colder than Marco's damp fingerprints had been on my sleeve. William Douglas's card came next. Then others, names I knew from newspaper archives, from police reports, from the whispered late-night stories Marco had tried to warn me about. The cards kept coming, an impossible stack of check-ins 60 years deep, each one soaked through with that wrong-feeling water. Each one signed in its owner's hand, each one marked for room 417 at 3:17 a.m. My fingers were numb where they'd touched the cards, the skin pruned as if I'd been underwater for hours. The signatures were still writing themselves, an endless choreography of final check-ins. And beneath the printer's mechanical rhythm, I could have sworn I heard voices. Whispers. The sound of dozens of pens scratching out names in perfect synchronization. The registration cards piled up, water pooling on the desk and dripping onto my shoes. Each drop echoed like footsteps in an empty corridor, like someone approaching, like everyone approaching. The desk drawer was open. Marco's maintenance keys, the set he'd pressed into my hand that night, were missing. My phone lit up with a news alert, an algorithm choosing the worst possible moment to remind me of history. 4 guests vanish from Windward Hotel, investigation ongoing. I scrolled frantically, The hotel had blamed water damage, closed the 4th floor, but older articles mentioned other disappearances, dating back to the original well. Always in threes, always on the 3rd night. Just like Marco had tried to tell me. Water dripped onto my phone screen. I looked up. A dark stain spread across the lobby ceiling, water seeping through in steady drops that seemed to whisper as they fell. Each drop struck with the rhythm Marco had noticed in the pipes. Like breathing, like keeping time. My tablet flashed with a new notification. Marco's last text message, never sent, appeared. Found the old well chamber. Goes deeper than the plans show. They never sealed it. They're still down the... The elevator dinged again. The doors opened to an empty car, water pooling on its floor. A wet trail of footprints led from it to the stairwell, still fresh. They matched the prints Marco's boots had left that night. I had to know. The stairwell door groaned open, decades of sealed humidity hitting me like a wall. Emergency lights cast red shadows that turned the wet footprints black. They led up, stopping at the 4th floor landing where water seeped under the door. Marco's maintenance keys hung in the lock. Every phone on the 4th floor rang at once, a chorus of electronic screams echoing through the door. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and beneath it, voices. So many voices, all of them whispering what Marco had tried to warn me about. I pushed the door open. The renovation signs hung in tatters, printed dates faded to nothing. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, longer than the building's dimensions allowed, longer than any of Marco's blueprints had shown. Water poured from beneath every door, soaking the worn carpet. The ceiling rippled like the surface of a pond seen from below. My flashlight caught something metallic. Marco's tablet, propped against the maintenance room door. Its screen flickered to life as I approached. The video player was already open, cued to his final inspection recording. The timestamp showed 2 weeks ago, the night he disappeared. The camera moved through the utility tunnels, Marco's breathing steady at first. "3rd night checking the pipes," he said, voice echoing in the confined space. "Been comparing the inspection photos to the original blueprints. Something's wrong with the dimensions." The camera panned across ancient brickwork, stopping at a section that didn't match the rest. "See this?" Marco's hand entered the frame, tracing a pattern in the mortar. "These aren't structural supports. They're containment symbols. Found the same markings in the city archives, in documents about the original well. But they called it something else back then." His light caught a metal plaque, half hidden behind pipes. The text was worn but legible. "Ward maintenance access, containment level B." The camera shook slightly. They built the hotel on top to hide it. The well wasn't for water. It was a ward, a prison, and these... He swung the camera toward a series of dark openings in the wall. "These aren't cave formations, they're..." A sudden rush of water cut him off. The camera spun, catching glimpses of impossible things. Faces in the darkness, hands reaching through solid stone, bodies flowing like liquid. Marco's voice rose in panic. "They're still here, still checking in. The hotel wasn't meant to house guests. It was meant to contain..." Static overwhelmed the image. When it cleared, Marco's face filled the frame, eyes wide with terror. "If you find this, don't trust the blueprints. Don't trust the history. The whole building is a lie. The well goes deeper than they wrote down, and what's down there, they're not dead. They were never dead. They're just waiting, checking in every night until..." The video cut to darkness and the sound of floodwaters. The last frame showed Marco's face again, but not in panic. He was smiling now, an expression that wasn't quite his own. Behind him, other faces pressed against the camera lens, all wearing that same wrong smile. The maintenance room door hung open at the corridor's end, emergency lights casting red shadows on the pooling water. Inside, Marco's investigation covered the walls. The full truth he'd pieced together about the Windward. The oldest documents dated to 1891. Not construction permits for a hotel, but correspondence between the city council and something called the Ward Containment Society. The letters discussed a growing problem. People who weren't quite people anymore. Citizens who had gone into the old wells and come back. Changed. Walking, talking, but leaving wet footprints that never dried. Smiling too wide. checking into hotels but never checking out. The society had built the ward, a structure of spelled brick and warded stone, around the deepest well, the one that led to whatever dark water had started the transformations. The hotel was built later, a cover story. The guests were never meant to be travelers, but containment units. Each room on the 4th floor was a cell, designed to hold things that only looked human. Marco's notes traced the pattern through decades. The ward worked at first. The things in the water were trapped, held in check by the society's symbols carved into the foundation stones. But they learned. They started checking in properly, signing registers, becoming almost human again. The hotel's guest records showed the same names repeating across decades. Sandra Adams, William Douglas, others, checking in over and over, wearing faces that never aged. The inspection photos showed the truth behind the walls. The cave formations were actually cocoons, dark shells where the guests waited between check-ins, suspended in water that flowed against gravity. And in the oldest pictures, deep in the original well chamber, something vast floated in the black water. Something that smiled with too many teeth and reached out with hands that rippled like waves. Marco's final notes were frantic. It's not a hotel, it's a hive. The guests are drones. They check in, take new faces, check out into the city to find more recruits. But the thing in the well, it's their queen, the one the society tried to contain. She's been breeding all this time, building a colony in the pipes, waiting for someone to open the wrong door. The last page held a map of the city's water system. Marco had traced the hotel's pipes. They connected to every major line, every reservoir. One crack in the ward, and the whole city would be open to them. The final note, written in Marco's shaking hand. The door isn't on the 4th floor. The door is the 4th floor. Every room, every check-in weakens the ward. They just need one more night. One more set of guests. One more. Water rushed from under every door now. In its reflection, I saw faces, the collective history of the Windward's guests. Hands reached up through impossible depths. Marco floated among them, but his transformation wasn't complete. His eyes still held recognition, trapped between human terror and inhuman hunger as the Queen's influence spread through him. The corridor stretched behind me, impossibly long. Water rose past my ankles, and I realized the truth. The 4th floor's impossible dimensions weren't a construction error. The space itself was warping, the ward failing as the boundaries between our world and their water realm dissolved. The registration cards I'd handled earlier had been more than just records. Each signature was a key, each check-in another crack in the society's containment. And I, through my investigation, through my presence here, had just given them their final night. The water reached my knees, ice cold and wrong. It pulled like hands, like hunger, like the Queen reaching through her drones to claim another recruit. Every door burst open at once, releasing a flood that brought with it the sounds of 1,000 check-ins. The same names, over and over, echoing through decades of the ward's slow failure. I ran. The corridor stretched, contracted, twisted. Room numbers changed as I passed. 417, 417, 417. Each one a cell in the ward, now broken. The exit sign danced away like a cruel mirage. Water chased me, faster than water should move. Marco's tablet screen lit up in my hand, his final video playing on loop. The door isn't on the 4th floor. The door is the 4th floor. Something surfaced behind me. I heard it rise, heard it breathe. Not Marco anymore, not any of the drones. Something vast, ancient, smiling with too many teeth. The Queen, free at last from her well. The stairwell door appeared, then vanished, then reappeared closer. I slammed through it as the flood reached my waist. The stairs descended into blackness, the lower levels already submerged in her domain. Up was the only option. Water cascaded down the steps. In its roar, voices called my name. Each landing I passed showed the same floor number, 4. The ward repeating itself, folding space as it failed. My phone buzzed. A message from what used to be Marco. Don't let them check you in, but it's too late. You've already signed the register. The roof access door hung open, spilling moonlight. I burst through it as the stairwell filled behind me. The city spread out below, oblivious to what we'd kept contained above it for over a century. Water poured from every window of the 4th floor, but it didn't fall. It flowed outward, seeking the path Marco had traced on his maps. Every water main, every reservoir, every pipe that could carry the Queen's influence. My phone lit up with reservation after reservation, all for room 417, all in my name, not check-ins anymore, recruitment papers. Each one a contract written in water and signed in transformed flesh. The rooftop door exploded outward in a flood of black water. Through it came the guests, not just faces now, but their true forms. Bodies that rippled like waves, smiles that opened too wide, eyes that reflected only deep water. Decades of drones, finally free to swim through air as easily as liquid. Marco floated among them, his transformation nearly complete. The human terror had faded from his eyes, replaced by the same hungry peace that marked all her children. His hand extended toward me, offering not a warning this time, but an invitation to join the Queen's expanding hive. Behind him, something vast rose from the stairwell, a shape like flowing water, but with too many angles, too many mouths. The Queen herself, wearing 100 borrowed faces that smiled with perfect hospitality. The thing the society had tried to contain, now free to check out and spread her domain through every pipe in the city. I found the maintenance ladder at the roof's edge, climbed down as the flood turned the windows black with bodies. My feet hit parking lot asphalt just as dawn broke. I ran until the windward was a silhouette against the morning sky, its 4th floor now a rippling membrane between our world and hers. The police found me an hour later. They discovered Marco's evidence, launched an investigation. Corporate suits were led away in handcuffs. The 4th floor was unsealed. They found the ward chamber, hidden beneath decades of renovations. But the water had drained away, leaving only damp concrete and rusted pipes. The containment symbols were eroded, the barriers broken. They didn't understand what Marco had discovered, what the hotel had really been built to contain, what I had helped release. I quit that morning, found a day job across town, tried to forget, but last night my home phone rang. Through static and the sound of rushing water, Marco's voice whispered, not a warning, but a welcome. The ward wasn't to keep us in, it was to keep us contained until we were ready, until we had enough guests, enough faces, enough names in the register. And you gave us that final check-in. The Queen sends her regards. She's looking forward to having you stay with us, permanently. I've turned off my taps, covered every drain, but I can feel the pressure building behind the walls. The pipes sing with her voice now, calling her children home. And sometimes, in the building's midnight chorus, I hear them. Marco, Sandra Adams, William Douglas, all the others, swimming through the walls, preparing rooms for new guests. They're not checking in anymore. They're spreading out. And lately, when I brush my teeth, when I wash my hands, when I drink from the tap, the water feels different, heavier, almost alive. My reflection ripples even when the surface is still. And my smile is starting to look like theirs. I think I know now why Marco's last message ended so abruptly. He wasn't taken. He checked himself in.